Today's frame we're running to cap is the acoustic artisan Banshee. Banshee was originally released in update 7.0 on March 18th, way back in 2013. Then after that the Prime dropped on February 28th, 2017. Her use rates in 2025 sit at just 0.09% and 0.18% for the normal and Prime frames respectively, which puts her way down in the bottom 10 least used frames in the entire game. Spoiler alert here, after taking her to cap 3 different times, I can completely understand why. What's happening, gamers? It's Ran. Now before the Banshee mains start coming at me down in the comments section, let me say this first. I don't actually think Banshee is that far away from being amazing. In fact, after these runs, I honestly think she perfectly shows how much Warframe's design philosophy has actually changed over the years. Back in 2013, crowd control was the full survivability plan. If enemies couldn't move or use abilities, that was good enough. But modern Warframe's completely different. Newer frames have overguard generation, DR, shield regen, status immunity, self-healing, damage scaling, room nuking, all baked in one kit. Banshee, meanwhile, is still out here trying to survive with the vibes, rolling guard and a dream. I played Banshee through to cap 3 different times and honestly didn't particularly enjoy any of them. I tried Omamori, tried Nourish, and then eventually Evade as subsumes. All 3 runs hit the same walls. But we'll come back to those later in the more detailed build sections and run overviews. But before we do get to those, I just want to say thanks again for the recent support on the channel. Level Cap series has been doing really well recently, and honestly I didn't expect this many people to be enjoying watching me psychologically torture myself with some of these frames. Remember now as well, we have a community Discord. You can join to share builds, fashion, your level cap runs, or just ask any questions and chill with the community. Link's going to be down in the description below as usual. So lads, on to the builds. As I alluded to in the intro section, I have Evade on as a subsume in the showcase here, replacing her 4. Honestly, this ended up just being the smoothest version of the build that I ran, because Banshee really needs some kind of survivability layer at level cap, and invisibility as always just solves so many problems immediately. I have Archon Stretch and Energy Nexus on here, which you probably don't actually need because energy economy isn't actually too bad on her. I could remove one of these and swap out probably Energy Nexus for another range mod or even Blind Rage if you don't mind going into negative efficiency. I have Rolling Guard on here for status cleanse as well as PSF for knockdown resist. If you don't have PSF yet, you can use something like Handspring instead and you'll be completely fine. For the shards, I'm running 4 Tau red strength shards and 1 Tau yellow parkour speed, just to help with mobility around the tile set and rotations. For the arcanes, we've got the usual Arcane Crepuscular to synergize with Evade's invisibility for extra ability strength and final crit damage, alongside Molt Augmented for more strength scaling. Now for the weapon setup. If you've been watching me for a while, you'll know this is a comfort pick for me for level cap runs, especially when I'm using Evade. We have Scourge Prime in the primary slot, alongside Jewel Tox in the secondary slot. Scourge Prime's alt fire throws the spear down, creates an aura which magnetizes bullets towards enemy heads and weak spots. That obviously synergizes well with Jewel Tox and Evade because headshots help maintain invisibility uptime consistently. Honestly, this combo is one of those setups, it just feels borderline unfair. At certain points I genuinely forgot I was even playing Banshee because the weapons were carrying so hard. Tested a bunch of other setups across the runs too, alongside all the usual strong level cap weapons. But one setup I actually found that was a lot of fun came from a video by another amazing creator called Turbo Monk using the Vidaria Prime. The electric lightning bolts that fly out of it synergize really well with Sonar because it helps damage to spread through groups. It's definitely not the strongest setup compared to Jewel Tox for example, but it was probably the most unique and fun version that I actually ran. I'll leave a link to their video down in the description because it's definitely worth checking out. Finally, we have the usual Praetos for movement speed and parkour because moving fast around the tile set is super important, especially at level cap. For the pet, I used classic Panzer Vulpaphyla, mainly for viral priming and supporting Archon Stretch with a claw setup. Realistically though, you can pretty much use any companion you want because the build doesn't rely heavily on the pet. I also tried another amp setup in this run with the 777 amp. That's made up of the Clamora Prism, Propa Scaffold and Certus Brace, all of which are available from Little Duck on Fortuna. Primary fire on this one is basically a void flamethrower, while the alt fire is a slow moving explosive. The issue with this at level cap is the alt fire becomes a bit more dangerous to yourself than the enemies, because half the time you're knocking yourself down, and the Void Flamethrower is a bit annoying to have to get up close and use. You can counteract these issues, of course, with the new artifact mods, but I honestly still just think the X4X or the Fad Scaffold remains the best overall option for level cap because the Glaive Disc utility is just so strong. Before we get a look at Banshee in action, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Thanks. Let's take a quick look at Banshee's abilities and what we actually have to work with here. Her passive is honestly one of the biggest signs of her age. All Banshee's weapons and Sentinel weapons are treated as silent. That is literally it. Of course, it helps a little bit here with evade, but compared to more modern passive, this feels absolutely ancient. Some newer frames get entire survivability mechanics built into their passives, while Banshee gets your guns are now quiet. This passive desperately needs a touch-up, in my opinion. Her one is called Sonic Boom. Banshee emits a sonic shockwave in a 180-degree cone that ragdolls enemies backwards. On this build, we're using the augment Sonic Fracture, which adds armor strip to the ability. Now, obviously armor strip is extremely useful at level cap because enemy EHP gets ridiculous later on into the run, but the funniest part of this ability is its description, which says pushing enemies with enough force to incapacitate or kill attackers. Trust me lads, outside a base star chart, nobody and nothing is down to 50 impact damage. Now the next two abilities are what actually makes Banshee Banshee. First we have Sonar. Using acoustic tracking, Sonar exposes glowing weak points in enemies that massively amplify damage. On paper this sounds absolutely insane, of course, and honestly is very strong. The problem is that these weak points don't actually count as real weak points for a ton of mechanics in the game. Things like acuity mods, Incarnon charging, and other weak point interactions don't properly work with Sonar weak points, which feels incredibly outdated and counterintuitive. I think this single change alone would massively improve Banshee. If DE updated Sonar so those weak points counted as actual weak points for your whole team, Banshee would instantly become stronger, more interactive, and honestly way more fun to play. Right now Sonar feels like you're fighting against newer systems instead of synergizing with them. Next we have her 3, which is called Silence. Probably the most recognizable part of her kit, as it's also her helmet subsume, which you can take off to put on other frames. Silence surrounds Banshee in an aura that disables enemies' abilities and briefly stuns targets entering the radius. This ability carries her survivability on her actual kit, turns off Xmas abilities, no Thrax attacks, no Acolyte abilities, stops violence from turning your UI off and just ruining your whole life. At least when it works consistently it does those things. I did notice during really dense enemy spawns that sometimes enemies would still be able to use abilities through Silence, which became more and more noticeable later on into the run. Overall, Silence is a good ability and probably the main reason Banshee can even function at these kind of levels. For 4 though, that's what I selected for her subsume slot, and as we know, I put evade in here. The permanent invisibility just ended up being infinitely more usable than trying to use Soundquake in any way at level cap. Like I mentioned earlier, I also tried Nourish and Omamori versions of the build. Nourish actually felt decent early on because of the viral priming, and that was nice, but eventually just didn't really help me with survivability. Omamori was probably the safest setup overall, but it felt slower and more passive compared to evade. Evade ended up being the cleanest option because it let me focus more on moving and positioning rather than trying to shieldgate every 3 seconds. And as you know from watching me, I hate shieldgating and I will always try to do anything to get around having to shieldgate. With Banshee, it feels like most of the heavy lifting is being done by the weapons rather than Banshee herself. Mainly, her abilities provide support in Sonar and Silence. That's probably one of the main reasons why she has such a low usage rate nowadays. Not because she's unusable or not because she's actually weak, but because more modern Warframes actually have evolved to include better kit design than what she currently has. I don't think she needs a full rework or anything like that. A few smart changes could completely transform her and see her rising up the ranks of usability. Make Sonar weak points count as actual weak points, improve consistency of Silence, maybe tie survivability or shield recovery into Sonar kills, and just update or modernize the passive and give it something different. That alone would probably shoot her usage rate right up. Anyway lads, somehow we made it through another one, no matter how painful it actually was. I want to thank you for sticking around and listening to me yap about Banshee and my suffering through this run. If you made it this far, help me out with a like, share and sub to battle the YouTube algorithm overlords. Honestly, I want to hear your opinions on this one because I feel like Banshee is one of the clearest examples of an old frame design. So if you're one of the 3 remaining Banshee mains on the earth, let me know your favourite setups for running her. At cap, down in the comments below. Next frame up for the series will be the Radiator Brick himself, Corvex, who I'm hoping will be a little more enjoyable than this experience. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the gameplay, lads. And until next time, take it easy.
valuable lesson.